Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Tony, I've spent the last several days baking in the sun and eating fair food at the big 4th of July community fair. So I am feeling fantastic and the absolute healthiest I do all year long after I've got several days worth of fried food and sun poisoning. So yeah, I'm doing great, Tony. More importantly, how are you?
Doing all right. What is your favorite fair food?
I'm usually good for, some kind of a fried Oreo or fried something like that. I have been spoiled with funnel cakes. I work with a guy who runs a funnel cake stand or ran a funnel cake stand and will make funnel cakes occasionally for work functions. So I don't usually bother getting funnel cakes at fair foods, but at a fair, because I have access to those during non-fair times. But very, very, that's always a good one. You don't ever feel great after a funnel cake or an elephant ear, but you feel really good while you're eating them. And then afterwards, it's kind of like, oh boy, I need 7 glasses of water. Do you have a favorite?
Well, growing up, it was the elephant ear, and it was, I haven't had one in over 30 years, so I don't know if they've maintained their quality back at the Henry County Fair, utmost quality. Also, back when I was a kid, they seemed pretty gigantic. I'm guessing now they're probably about the size of a street taco tortilla, and it would be very underwhelming, but I was always an elephant ear person. You mentioned the deep fried Oreo, and I remember where I was the first time I ever had a deep fried Oreo, and it was not at a fair. It was at the media party for the 2016 game against Clemson. And so, there's always the past bowl game we went to was a very disappointing spread of food, but the one in Arizona that year was spectacular. And so I had deep fried Oreo for the first time, and it was one of those things that affected me so much. I just wanted to tell everybody about it. And yes, I had been drinking, but you're everywhere, you're at the table, and I'm just going and getting people these deep fried Oreos. Have you heard about deep fried Oreos? Let me spread the word about deep fried Oreos. And they were spectacular. And I don't know that I've had any since, just because they were so good, but I don't think they're good for you, Tom. I don't think they are.
I like the idea of you being this evangelist, like the Great Commission for trans fats. I like that a lot, with you just running around. Can I tell you some good news about fried Oreos? I'm usually good for one of those, and it's I'm going to have one, and it's going to be tasty, and that's it, and I'm still going to feel kind of crappy after that. But if I eat 3, you get this exponential curve of how bad you feel after you eat each individual one after that. So yeah, I have learned to learn my limits, and just one, and don't fall into the just one more trap with deep fried Oreos. Just have one, and then we'll see you next year at the fair.
And I know people are wondering, how does this topic get into what we're going to talk about? But as you're mentioning it, I think it flows perfectly into following recruiting, because it can make you feel really, really good at the time, but then also after you've consumed some following of recruiting, it can make you think, oh, I don't feel so great. And that has kind of been the situation at Ohio State following the defensive line recruiting over the past week. You get the high of landing not Eddrick Houston, but rather Justin Scott, the defensive tackle, on Sunday. And you're like, oh, this is fantastic. And you consume. And then you're ready for more on Monday. But Marquise Lightfoot, the defensive end, chooses Miami. You're like, oh, I don't feel so good. And that is following recruiting. It's the highs and it's the lows. And then after a while, you're like, I'm ready for another deep fried Oreo.
Deep fried Oreos are also where interior defensive linemen come from. That is how interior defensive linemen are built. So how do you get a high school kid to weigh 310 pounds? Deep fried Oreos, friends. There's a reason that a lot of the interior defensive linemen come from the Deep South, or what I call the Sweet Tea Belt. A lot of the same principles at work there. So yeah, this was a kind of 2 surprising outcomes for Ohio State. I think Justin Scott was one of the more out of nowhere commitments for Ohio State. Not that I mean, we did a show with Mark Givler last week talking about, potential, here are some guys who could be committing, and Justin Scott was, he was on the list of guys, how many 5 stars is Ohio State going to get? And he was on the list, but he wasn't necessarily, Ohio State was a favorite necessarily. It didn't seem like anything was imminent. And then all of a sudden, boom, on Sunday, it was all of a sudden, oh, hey, they got Justin Scott. Like, what? When? Where? Who? So that was a very big surprise. And then Marcus Lightfoot, who Ohio State, the industry consensus and everyone that we had been around had been hearing, and everyone around college football had seemingly been hearing, was Marquise Lightfoot was all Ohio State. And then just the last day or so before his commitment, you started hearing rumblings that Miami was maybe making an NIL play, and maybe, and then all of a sudden, boom, he is one of the more surprising, sort of out of nowhere, last 24-hour flips that you've seen in a while. So, it is recruiting, and good news, Tony. They still don't put pen to paper until December, so there is still plenty more time for everyone to change their minds again.
Do you think, Tom, let me ask you this, losing Marquise Lightfoot to Miami, losing Mark Fletcher, the running back, the year before to Miami, does this make things even between Ohio State and Miami for Ohio State destroying the Hurricanes football program over 20 years ago now? Has this evened things up?
It's not even until what's-his-name makes a documentary for the 30 for 30 series about Miami's 2 incredible recruiting triumphs over Ohio State. It's Billy Corbin. Yes. Until Billy Corbin makes Cocaine Cowboys 3. This time it's a defensive lineman. I think this is one of these things where, you have long held the position that a player leaving and going to play for Miami is fine because you will never hear from them again. And I'm sure any Miami person right now hearing that will say, that is sour grapes. And then someone on our board talked about, who's the biggest loss that Ohio State's, Ohio State lost Sean Charles Henderson to Miami, and that's the biggest loss they've had to Miami in recruiting. And you go look at Sean Charles Henderson's recruiting, or his career at Miami, and it was like 278th overall pick, and suspensions, and missed time, and all sorts of stuff. And it's just, over the last 20 years, if a guy goes to Miami, it's like falling into the Springfield mystery spot. You just like, oh, well, he went to Miami. What happened to him? I don't know. Once they go in the tent, you don't ever see them again. And, every once in a while you'll turn on a Pinstripe Bowl or something, and it's like, oh yeah, that guy. But you don't, that if you were to flip these, and Justin Scott had announced for one of his other finalists, Notre Dame or Michigan, and Marquise Lightfoot had chosen Ohio State, that's probably worse for Ohio State, because if Justin Scott plays at Michigan, you're going to see Justin Scott every year. If Marquise Lightfoot goes to Miami, you're never going to see Marquise Lightfoot again unless Ohio State ends up in a Pinstripe Bowl or something dramatically changes about the course of Miami football history, which has that change has been just right around the corner for the last 20 years.
But maybe some change coming with Miami applying for admission into the AAU. And if they can get that done within the next 3 to 5 years, perhaps Marquise Lightfoot will be in the Big Ten and perhaps be on Ohio State's schedule. But yeah, Miami is, and I should have verified this, but I did see somebody on the board mention that one of the interviews Lightfoot gave about why he chose Miami is because after all of the work and after the practices, it's a relaxing place to be. And
how many times have we heard Marvin Harrison talk about how relaxing it is in Columbus? Constantly. He won't stop. He's like, I heard him talk about the hammock district down in the short north. It's just constant. Just put your feet up. Ohio State football. Put your feet up and relax. That's why, Tony, Ohio State has not been to as many Pinstripe Bowls as Miami. And I want to be super, super clear. Marquise Lightfoot is a hell of a football player.
Yeah.
Marquise Lightfoot is a fantastic pass rusher, incredibly well-rounded player. It's just when you go to Miami, you generally see your talents wasted. And that's just sort of been the track record for the last 20 years. And, change is always right around the corner. And, Uncle Luke is going to fix this up. And then there they are, 7-5 again. And so, it's just, it's a little bit of a, well, that's too bad. That was a poor choice. Like you would rather see someone like that from his personal interest standpoint. You would rather see someone like that go to an Alabama or a Georgia or somewhere where you're actually going to play and get developed, and not just have a relaxing time and then get to go to, maybe you get to dump mayo on your coach after a bowl game. That is something that you cannot offer. Can Ohio State promise you that? No, they cannot.
And if it sounds like we're bagging on Miami, believe me, later in the show we're going to talk about the lack of development of Ohio State defensive linemen. That might sound like we're bagging on Ohio State, because there's some significant names there that maybe were, I don't want to say insignificant, but anyway. So the Marquise Lightfoot thing took some wind out of the sails for what was shaping up and what is still possibly shaping up to possibly be the best defensive line haul in Ohio State history if things were to remain as they are. And we probably said the exact same thing about the Ohio State defensive line class last year. Let's just go ahead and get that out of the way with all of the guys that Ohio State was leading for that didn't end up choosing Ohio State. In fact, I don't know that any of them ended up choosing Ohio State at this point in the year. But so you've got already Justin Scott. They are the considerable favorites for Eddrick Houston, who is the number 4 defensive lineman, actually number 4 defensive lineman in the class. Actually number 6 overall, 24/7. Their composite combines edges and tackles, and so just in terms of defensive lineman overall, he's the number 6. Dylan Stewart out of Washington D.C. is the number 4 overall defensive lineman, the number 2 edge in the class. And after Justin Scott committed, then you had Crystal Balls coming in for Dylan Stewart. And so then there's all of this excitement. You could get the 4, the 5, and the 6th ranked defensive lineman in the class. Marquise Lightfoot is like 15th overall in terms of this list of defensive linemen. So it'll be a heck of a 4-man class. And you throw in somebody later on down the line, maybe like a Jaden Jackson from IMG, and it's shaping up to be a really incredible class. And then Lightfoot commits to Miami, and it's like, oh gosh, now where are they going to get the numbers? And one of the reasons why I say it's following Ohio, and I've said this for years, following Ohio State recruiting is a lot like eating a bunch of deep fried Oreos. You could end up with Justin Scott, Eddrick Houston, and Dylan Stewart, and there'll still be people going, oh, I really wish I would have had Marquise Lightfoot as well. And you want more, and it's like, well, can't you just be happy if it's just those 3 5-star players? Would that be okay?
Well, Ohio State right now they have more 5-star commits for 2024 than any other program. They have 4. Georgia and Alabama both have 3. I think there might be one more team with 3. Ohio State number 1 overall right now in terms of average player ranking in the class. They're number 2 in the class overall with, I think, 5 fewer commits than Georgia. They're ranked ahead of Michigan, even though Michigan has 8 more players committed right now. I mean, they're the number 2 program in the nation right now in the 247 composite team rankings, and they only have, I think, 18 players committed, something like that. So it is, there's a long way to go. This is going to be, assuming there are not massive defections from this class, or you don't have a ton of players just plummeting down the rankings for some reason this fall, this is going to be one of, if not the best classes in Ohio State history. This is going to be one of, if not the best defensive line classes in Ohio State history. And you're kind of seeing people already kind of going, well, what happened? I thought this was supposed to be this incredible July. It's like, well, they've already gotten 1 5-star, and they have another commitment potentially coming on Thursday, and then they have another potential commitment coming on the 23rd, and another potential commitment coming on the 30th, and another potential commitment coming on August 5th, and then another potential commitment coming on August 22nd. And like, all of these guys are top 100 caliber players. So most of them are top 50 players. A few of them are 5-stars. I mean, there's just, and the hay is not in the barn yet on any of this. They have not only are these guys not signed, some of them, all these guys that we're talking about now are not even verbally committed, but they are right now in a spot where they have a fantastic foundation for this class, And you have a bunch more guys where even if they don't get all of them and they just get some to most of them, this is going to be one of, if not the best classes in Ohio State history. So, it feels like they have solved many of the NIL related issues they have had in the past, and they have, found ways to overcome it. And the NIL world continues to change, and there will probably be more NIL losses at some time in the future. But there were people who couldn't wait to tell you that, Ohio State football was basically dead because they weren't going to ever figure this out, and it was going to be terrible, and, pets' heads falling off and all that kind of stuff. And then here they are, and they're number 2 in the class, despite having, 17 or 18 commits, and a bunch more potentially on the way very soon. Like, it feels like pets' heads are probably just fine right now.
Maybe later on this summer, we can do a show, is this the best Ohio State running back class of all time? And look back at the running back class history, because it's rare for them to bring in 3 guys like they're shaping up to do this year. But Tom, if they do get those 3, if they do end up with Justin Scott, Dylan Stewart, and Eddrick Houston, and we would assume at least one more somewhere down the line, where could this rank among Ohio State's defensive class history, and what is the top class in defense, top defensive line class in Ohio State in I don't want to say history, but we've got a list here. I've got a list all the way going back to 1990, and I'm wondering where this class would rank among this list. And we don't have it ranked or anything, but there are, as I put this list together, one of the things that stood out to me is that the defensive line picks up when Urban Meyer arrives. The defensive line recruiting picks up when Urban Meyer arrives, and not that it was stagnant before then, but it was kind of stagnant before then. You got guys, Doug Worthington and like Lawrence Wilson. You'd get some of these guys out of state, but Urban Meyer arrived, and you'd get those guys out of state every single year, and you'd get multiple guys out of state. And so as you peruse this list that I sent you, what is there a top class? What do you think is the top class? And we don't have any ranking systems or anything, but what sticks out to you?
Yeah, I think you, just looking through the list, and the list that you put together goes all the way back to 1990. And the first thing that I thought was, wow, there were a lot of misses on defensive line recruiting in the 1990s and early 2000s. And the second thing that was what you brought up, which is, boy, the defensive line recruiting got so much better when Urban Meyer arrived, and then potentially even better than that when Larry Johnson arrived. These two things are probably not a coincidence. When you think about how Florida beat Ohio State in the 2007 BCS National Championship game, how did they do it? Well, they had Ohio State's tackles basically looking like turnstiles for much of the night and beat it with pass rush, and Troy Smith had no chance to do anything. And so Urban Meyer knows the value of a good pass rush, so then that became a much, much bigger focus. And, even the guys who you're talking about being out-of-state guys, before Urban got there, Doug Worthington was from upstate New York. Lawrence Wilson was from Michigan, I believe. And, now, then all of a sudden, then you're getting the Bosas out of Florida, and you're getting, JT or Chase Young out of Maryland, and, guys out of all over the country, because that became a draw to come play for Urban Meyer, to come play for Larry Johnson. So, when you look through the classes, it's impossible to put the 2024 class, which is still a theoretical class, and we haven't seen any kind of college production there yet. So it's kind of hard to put them on that list. Just going through in terms of classes where the full class was really contributors the whole time, I think 2021, JT Tuimoloau, Jack Sawyer, Mike Hall, Tyleik Williams, that one is going to be up there. They're still graded incomplete right now. We'll see how this year ends up. I think that one is ultimately going to be very high on the list. 2018 was that was an incredibly deep class. It took 7 guys. 6 of them ended up being at least contributors. Teron Vincent, Tyreek Smith, Tyler Friday, Tommy Togiai, Antoine Jackson, Javonte Jean-Baptiste. Alex Williams ended up transferring to Vanderbilt and never really played at Ohio State. Those are really, really good classes. But probably 2013, Joey Bosa, Michael Hill, Billy Price, Tyquan Lewis, Donovan Munger, Tracy Sprinkle. I mean, Bosa and Tyquan Lewis were huge, huge players on some really, really good Ohio State teams. And then so was Billy Price, but he just had to change to a different position. Noah Spence, Adolphus Washington, Tommy Shutt, Savon Pittman, and Jamal Marcus in 2012. Spence, was an incredible player and then had to leave Ohio State under some off-field circumstances, but Adolphus Washington was a really important player on some of those big Ohio State teams. There are just so many teams where you've got like one really, there's like the one guy who is this incredible impact player and some other guys who were contributors or good depth players. I still think when all is said and done, I still kind of think 2021 is potentially going to be the best of all of those in terms of not just Nick Bosa was there and, like Nick Bosa, Jonathan Cooper, Malik Barrow were a class. And Cooper was obviously a long-term captain, block O, jersey recipient, all that kind of stuff. But they didn't have like 3, 4, 5 guys who were really long-term contributors in that class. I still think 2021 is potentially going to end up there with pretty much anyone.
That's where I am as well. I think you're going to see 4 NFL guys of the 4 that were in the class, and that's a fair hit rate. That's a pretty decent hit rate. That's probably the best among any of these classes. I think I probably should end up going with some sort of a scoring system, like the class gets a point for every start, and then maybe like 2 points for every All Big Ten season, then 3 points for every All American season, and then another for like an award or something, and then you see where it all shakes out, and then you can have it's definitive. But of course, the 2018 class with Teron Vincent, Tyreek Smith, Tyler Friday, Tommy Togiai, Antoine Jackson, Javonte John Baptiste, like all six of those guys started at least a few games. They were around, but that class may be at the top of the list. Like if you're voting for Heisman and the same guy gets every 4th place vote, he ends up 3rd place or 2nd place, that sort of thing, where it's maybe quantity more than quality that would get them up there. I feel bad for Malik Barrow, part of that 2016 class with Nick Bosa and Jonathan Cooper, because Barrow was obviously got injured, but he was the best player on IMG's team, and he was incredible in high school. And imagine what those 3 could have done. I do like the fact that the 2013 class with Joey Bosa and Tyquan Lewis had a stretch of 3 years where that class produced a Big Ten Defensive Lineman of the Year. And then I think maybe the year or 2 after that, also the Remington Trophy Award winner. So that's going to be hard to beat. But of course, Billy Price, he was impactful on the offensive side. Michael Hill was a starter for an entire year. Tracy Sprinkle was a starter. So you get basically 5 starters out of that class, even though one of them's on offense. 2012, Urban Meyer's first class. Probably the only Ohio State class in history with 3 5-star defensive linemen, even though like Tommy Shet was a 5-star on Scout, which no longer exists, and I'm not sure that even their records exist anymore. I believe there was a fire, and they were all it was all paper, so they were never digitized. And then Tommy Shet never produced like a 5-star guy. Some of these others, the Robert Rose and Thaddeus Gibson class of 2006, like what could have been Robert Rose from Glenville, Army All-American. Thaddeus Gibson ends up being pretty good, but those 2 to me could have been by themselves could have been something special. Just a bunch of names that I'm with you though through all of this. That 2021 class has very much the potential and is already realizing some of that potential. You look at the 2 classes below them, Tom, 2020 and 2019, and there's only 1 player remaining from the 2020 class and only 1 from the 2019 class. So when we talk about the low numbers that Ohio State has on the defensive line and the need to add more this year, you can look back to that 2020 class of Jacoby Cowan, Darian Henry, and Ty Hamilton and see like there's Ty Hamilton is the lone senior, I believe, Jaden McKenzie, but there's not a senior laden situation up there.
Right. And that's, I think, sort of if you went and did like safety recruiting over the same period of time, you'd be looking at sort of a very similar situation where you took all these guys and then so many of them have washed out and are at other programs. Darian Henry Young is at Kentucky, and Noah Potter from the 2019 class, I think he's at Cincinnati now. Colby Cowan at UNC. And what's so interesting is these are kind of, I think, vaguely in order of star ranking or, going down the class ranking. Ty Hamilton, Devon Hamilton, both at the very far right of their classes, meaning they were the lowest rated player in their classes. And boy, the Hamiltons out of lovely Pickerington in Ohio sure have turned out to be two really productive, underrated players for Ohio State. I think Ohio, maybe the market inefficiency is, are there any more Hamilton brothers out there? Because they've both turned into really productive players for Ohio State in a way that guys ranked way ahead of them have not. And, Zach Harrison was at the top of that 2019 class. He obviously had a very good career and is off to the NFL now. But, this is why we always talk about the importance of building depth. And you have to have a certain number of guys in these classes to keep the pipeline flowing, because they're not all going to pan out. You go through this list, and even the class, there are guys who were ranked very, very highly who either injuries or just didn't pan out on the field or off field, whatever. You're not going to have a 100% hit rate. Even if you were Larry Johnson and you've been doing this for a long time and you know how to develop and you know how to identify talent, you're still not going to have a 100% hit rate on these guys. So that's why it's so important to keep stacking all these classes on top of each other, and why when you have a year when you had only one defensive end in the 2023 class in Joshua Mickens, why that position is such a significant position for Ohio State this year, and why we're going to be keeping talking about defensive end and defensive line recruiting a bunch this year, because that is going to be a position where they really, really need to be strong in the 24 class to make up the fact that they missed on a couple of their top targets in 23.
I could point at the 2017 class: Chase Young, Haskell Garrett, 2 All-Americans, Jerron Cage, a 6-year guy. 1993 class: Mike Vrabel, Matt Finkus, not too bad. Looking at the best Jim Tressel class, I think it's probably 2002 with Quinn Pitcock and Mike Kudla. Joel Penton was part of that. Tim Schafer. Jay Richardson played years in the NFL, but you go through the rest of that. Well, you Doug Worthington, Lawrence Wilson, Todd Denlinger, they all were starters. Dexter Larimore in 2006 with Thaddeus Gibson, they were starters. You got a big play out of Solomon Thomas from the 2007 class with Cameron Hayward. But as you look at this, is there a clear number one for the Jim Tressel recruiting? Because I might go with 2002. Yeah,
2002 probably has the best depth of quality depth of a Jim Tressel class, because there are just a lot of years with 2 and 3 guys under Tressel and sort of late Cooper era as well. And if you're bringing in 2 defensive linemen in a class, 3 defensive linemen in a class, boy, you need your hit rate to be good, because that is not a spot where guys typically walk on the field and just dominate from day one. So you're going to have some development time. So it is really important to have a good deep class. So just from that perspective, yeah, I'm probably going to go with 2002, just because you got 5 names. Tim Schafer ended up moving to offensive line and never, I don't think he ever ended up starting at Ohio State, but Richardson, Kudla, and Pitcock were all multi-year contributors at Ohio State, really good players at Ohio State. Joel Penton won, was it the Werfel Award, I think, at Ohio State? So he was up, and they took down the individual awards from the wall inside the practice facility, but Joel Penton's face was up, Joel Penton's smiling face was up on the wall for some of his off-field work while he was at Ohio State. I mean, that's a really good class overall. I think that has to be the best Tressel era class. What was interesting to me was you look at some of these names from the past, it doesn't feel like guys flip-flop sides of the ball. That feels like that's really a desperate move at this point. If you see someone, a defensive lineman flip-flop into the offensive side of the ball or vice versa. When you go back through the list, it's like, boy, that used to happen all the time. Tim Schafer did that. Billy Price was on here as a defensive lineman, ended up going to the offensive line. There were a bunch of guys who ended up switching sides of the ball. It feels like that doesn't happen anymore, but apparently it used to happen a lot more than, I guess at least I thought it did back a decade or two ago.
Well, even the 2011 class, you had 2 of them, Chase Ferris and Joel Hale.
Mm-hmm.
Both of their 5-man class, 2 of them end up on the offensive line. The last 2 times they've signed 6 defensive linemen. 2, there's been 1 guy from each class to end up on the offensive side. In 2015, it was Josh Allaby, and in 2013, Billy Price. And really, over the last, since 1990, they've only signed more than 5 guys 3 times, and we've talked about that. 2018 with 7, and then 15 and 13 with 6. And so the last 3 years, they've signed 4, which, seems to be like it gives them decent numbers moving forward, other than the fact that 2021 class might hit so well that they could be on their way out before, you even know it. And so I wonder how many is not enough in 2024. Is 3 enough? Is 4 enough? Can they go get 5? And one thing they'll always tell you, the coaches always tell you, we're not going to reach. And Ohio has had some guys, in this year's class at Ohio State didn't really like, Brian Robinson being one, and another guy, name is escaping me, that recently committed to Michigan from Ohio, where these guys are tweeners, like not big enough for one position, too big for the other, that sort of thing, where Ohio State's like, yeah, and under Tressel, probably those guys are Buckeyes. At this point, you're getting so specialized where it's like, well, no, we feel good about these guys, and we're not sure where you're going to end up. So when you just let the out-of-state guys go, or when you let the in-state guys go, that makes it even more important to hit. And if they can get who the guys we're talking about, then, as we know, recruiting rankings are infallible. So that would be huge.
Yeah, extremely scientific, very precise, always, never in doubt. Yes, recruiting rankings. It does feel like you probably need to be taking minimally 4, maybe 5 every class at this point, just because you go back through these lists, and there's a bunch of guys who were at Ohio State for years and years and never panned out, but they were at Ohio State for 4 or 5 years. Now, if you're a guy who's not going to pan out or who's not even close to sniffing the field, you're gone after a year or two. And then you get that turnover, you get that churn in that room. And with a place, with a position group where it takes a little while to be physically ready to get on the field, you need to have some veteran depth at this, at this spot. You need to have some veteran depth on the offensive line. It feels to me like whatever X was for, how many players in this position group did you need to take 5 years ago? It feels like it's kind of like X plus 1 now. You got to take an extra guy, find an extra guy, and you're not reaching. You're not going to take the 2-star guy and you're going to steal him away from Western Michigan or something. But you've got to find guys who are the kind of guys who might go to Kentucky, or the kind of guys who might have gone to Michigan State under Mark D'Antonio. And if they're maybe good enough, you might have to look at taking another guy, because of the way roster churn works right now with the transfer portal and guys. Ohio State has not had nearly as much turnover as other programs have, but right now I don't think you can feel super confident that you're going to have, you're going to have 4 of your 5 guys or 3 of your 4 guys for 3-4 years in any given class in any given position group. You have to kind of assume. Look at the the cornerbacks. Look at the safeties. They've had a ton of guys churn in and out over the last few years. They've already lost a couple receivers from the class of 2022, and those guys basically played 1 season and boom, they're out. So it's getting harder and harder to keep guys on campus. So you've got to make sure, keep stocking that pond, because other teams are going to be fishing in your pond, legally or a little, maybe the season hasn't really opened yet, but they're out there in their boats anyway. So you're going to have people fishing in your pond. So you got to make sure you keep it stocked so you don't run out of fish.
It is interesting because the last 3 years they've taken 4 each year, and 4 of the previous 5 years they'd only taken 3 each year, except for that 2018 outlier where they took 7 because they'd only taken 6 the previous 2 years. And it's just there's too much up and down there. I think if you can get into the solid 4 and 5 every single year, that keeps things a little bit more even keel, and you're not, the boat is only rocking a little when somebody steps off and jumps onto another boat. Whereas, if you've got, we've got 7 on this this part of the boat and 2 on this part of the boat, Tom, that's how boats sink. Unless I am a sailor. Anything else before we go?
No, I think the idea of you in a sailor suit and with a little hat is probably exactly the thought we want to leave everyone with. So I think we need to wrap it up right now and not a moment later.
All right, then. Want to thank you all for joining us, as always. Please find us at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Become a member. Say hello to us there on the forum. We are there right now talking about the biggest surprises in Ohio State recruiting history, and a bunch of old names from way back when popping up and chipping back into the memory banks. Of course, you can find us on youtube.com/Buckeye Huddle. If you're watching us there right now, go ahead and hit the like button, thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell to be notified, all that good stuff. And of course, you can find us at facebook.com/Buckeye Huddle as well. So thank you all for tuning in, and we'll talk to you guys later.